My name is Eleanor Thompson, and at 72, I never imagined that being told I was too old-fashioned for their upscale event would reveal which relationships in my life were built on genuine love and which were crafted from social climbing and appearances. The moment I revealed the luxury European cruise I'd already paid for as their anniversary gift, after my daughter-in-law insisted I wasn't sophisticated enough to attend their celebration, changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This photograph was taken at my son Robert's wedding to Vanessa 5 years ago. There I am in my blue dress, standing beside Robert, with Vanessa in her designer gown, all smiling beneath the crystal chandeliers of the historical hotel they chose for their wedding. I thought we were building a relationship despite our different backgrounds. I was wrong. My late husband, Charles, always said, "Remember, Ellie, fancy wrapping doesn't make the gift inside any more valuable." This wisdom became my anchor when Vanessa's true nature was revealed through her planning of their 5th anniversary celebration. After Charles passed away 2 years ago, my relationship with Robert and Vanessa began to shift. Robert's calls became less frequent, and Vanessa's occasional visits always included subtle comments about my quaint home and traditional taste, suggesting my lifestyle was somehow deficient compared to their urban sophistication. The first warning sign came when Robert mentioned they were planning a very special anniversary celebration at Le Ciel, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. When I naturally asked about the details, his hesitation was palpable even through the phone. Their coordinated approach became clear when Vanessa called the next day, explaining that the celebration would be intimate and sophisticated, with a certain aesthetic they were trying to maintain. What they didn't know was that Charles and I had set aside money for each of our children's milestone celebrations. For Robert and Vanessa's 5th anniversary, we had planned something extraordinary, a 14-day European cruise with premium accommodations. Charles had even written a letter to be given to them along with the gift, expressing his regret at not being there to celebrate with them. The crisis came to a head when I received a text message from Vanessa. "Mother Thompson, after careful consideration, we've decided our anniversary celebration at Le Ciel will be adults only with a certain sophisticated ambiance. I'm sure you understand that your presence might make you uncomfortable among Robert's colleagues and our social circle. We can have a casual lunch the following weekend instead." My dear friend Margaret was with me when I received this message, and her outrage was immediate. "They're excluding you from your own son's anniversary? That's not just rude, Eleanor. It's cruel." I sat in stunned silence, rereading the message several times. The casual dismissal, the thinly veiled suggestion that I wouldn't fit in with their sophisticated friends, the relegation to a casual lunch as an afterthought. All of it struck deeper than I wanted to admit. As the hurt gave way to clarity, I realized Margaret was right. This wasn't about different social circles or generations. It was about basic respect. In that moment, I made a decision that would dramatically change the course of our family dynamics. "Margaret," I said firmly, "I think it's time to reveal the anniversary gift a bit earlier than planned." The next evening was their anniversary dinner at Le Ciel. I knew they would be there at 7 p.m., surrounded by the colleagues and social connections Vanessa so desperately wanted to impress. With Margaret as my moral support, I put on my best dress, a classic deep burgundy gown Charles had always loved, and asked my grandson Timothy, Robert's son from his first marriage who was visiting from college, to drive us to the restaurant. Walked into Le Ciel with the elegant cruise documents folder in hand. I spotted them immediately, Robert in his tailored suit, Vanessa resplendent in a designer dress, surrounded by people whose names I'd heard mentioned but never been introduced to. The moment Vanessa saw me approaching, her smile froze and then fell entirely, replaced by an expression of mortified shock. "Mother Thompson," she managed, her voice tight. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." Clearly, I replied pleasantly, aware of the curious eyes of their guests. I received your message that I wouldn't be sophisticated enough for tonight's celebration, but I couldn't let your anniversary pass without delivering your gift in person. With that, I placed the elegant folder on the table between them and opened it to reveal the cruise documents, the itinerary, and Charles's letter on top. Your father and I planned this before he passed. A 14-day European cruise, departing this Saturday. Everything is paid for, including the exclusive excursions Vanessa has mentioned wanting to experience. The table fell silent as Robert stared at the documents in disbelief. Vanessa's expression shifted from embarrassment to shock as she processed what she was seeing. This, Robert began, his voice faltering as he lifted his father's letter. Dad helped plan this? It was our gift to you both, I said simply. Charles believed anniversary celebrations should include family because marriages impact everyone who loves you. He would have been hurt to be excluded, just as I was. But he also believed in turning painful moments into opportunities for growth. I closed the folder and placed it fully in Robert's hands. The cruise will be wonderful. I hope it gives you both time to reflect on what sophistication truly means in a family. True elegance isn't about expensive restaurants or impressing colleagues. It's about how we treat the people who have loved us longest. With that, I turned to leave, aware of the stunned silence at the table. Timothy was waiting by the entrance, his expression a mixture of concern and barely concealed admiration. "You okay, Grandma?" he asked quietly as he offered his arm. "Actually, I'm better than I've been in quite some time," I replied, surprised to find it was true. Standing up for myself, for Charles's memory and for what family should mean, had awakened something I had allowed to go dormant in my grief. As we walked to the car, Margaret was waiting, her expression anxious until she saw my face. "Well?" she prompted, as Timothy helped me into the back seat. "I believe," I said with quiet certainty, "that their anniversary celebration just became more educational than they anticipated. What I couldn't yet know was that this moment would mark not just a confrontation, but the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through our entire family in ways none of us could have anticipated." The drive home from Le Ciel was quieter than the journey there. Timothy concentrated on the road, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror with a mixture of concern and newfound respect. Margaret sat beside me in the back seat, her hand occasionally patting mine in silent support. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a complex tangle of emotions I wasn't quite ready to untangle. "Do you think they'll still go on the cruise?" Timothy finally asked, breaking the silence as we turned onto my street. It was a question I'd been asking myself since walking out of the restaurant. The cruise was non-refundable, deliberately. So, as Charles had always believed that commitment was necessary for following through on important experiences. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whether they go or not will tell me everything I need to know about where we go from here." Back home, settled in my living room with a cup of tea Margaret insisted on making, I finally allowed myself to process what had happened. The look on Vanessa's face when I appeared at their table, shock transforming into mortification as her carefully curated social image cracked. Robert's expression of discomfort giving way to genuine surprise and then shame, as he realized what Charles and I had planned for them. "You stood up for yourself beautifully," Margaret said, joining me with her own tea. Charles would have been proud. The mention of Charles brought both comfort and fresh grief. How I wished he were here to help navigate this situation with his characteristic blend of firmness and compassion. Charles had always been better at handling Robert's occasional lapses in judgment. "I just hope I haven't damaged their marriage," I said quietly. "Robert will be caught between his wife and his mother now." Margaret's response was typically direct. "If their marriage is damaged by you refusing to be disrespected, then they have bigger problems than your visit to the restaurant." Timothy, who had been quietly texting in the corner, looked up. "Dad just messaged me. He wants to know if you got home okay." The simple inquiry gave me a flicker of hope. At least Robert's first instinct after the confrontation was concern for my well-being. "Tell him yes and that I'm fine," I replied. "Nothing more." The three of us sat in comfortable silence for a while, the events of the evening settling around us like dust after a storm. Timothy eventually excused himself to the guest room, and Margaret prepared to leave. "Whatever happens next," she said, at the door, "remember that you did nothing wrong. You gave them a generous gift and asked only for basic respect in return. The fact that one seemed shocking to them says everything about their values, not yours." After she left, I found myself drawn to the small home office that still contained many of Charles's things. Among his papers was a folder labeled Family Celebrations, with sections for each of our children. Robert's section contained not just the cruise documentation, but Charles's handwritten notes about what excursions to include, which cabin to book, even which restaurants on board might appeal to Vanessa's sophisticated tastes. My husband had put so much thought into this gift, wanting to show his acceptance and love for the woman Robert had chosen, despite the subtle ways she had always held herself apart from our family. The realization brought fresh tears, not of hurt this time, but of gratitude for having shared my life with someone who understood that family relationships required both boundaries and bridges. Morning brought a text message from Robert. "Mom, can I come by around noon to talk? Just me." The request for a one-on-one conversation was promising. I replied with a simple yes, and spent the morning alternating between nervous anticipation and calm resolve. By the time his car pulled into my driveway, I had centered myself in the knowledge that whatever happened next, I had honored both Charles's memory and my own dignity. Robert looked tired when I opened the door, the kind of exhaustion that comes from a night of difficult conversations and personal reckoning. He hesitated briefly before accepting my offer of coffee, following me to the kitchen where so many family discussions had taken place over the decades. "I owe you an apology," he began simply, cradling the mug between his hands. "I should never have allowed Vanessa to exclude you from our celebration. It was disrespectful and hurtful, and I'm deeply sorry." The directness of his apology caught me by surprise. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps attempts to justify their behavior. This immediate accountability indicated a depth of reflection I hadn't anticipated. "Thank you for that," I acknowledged. It was hurtful, not just the exclusion itself, but the dismissive way it was communicated. Robert nodded, looking down into his coffee. "I've been thinking about what you said, about true elegance being how we treat the people who have loved us longest. Dad always understood that, and somewhere along the way I forgot it." The mention of Charles created a moment of shared grief between us, a reminder of the steadying presence we had both lost. "The cruise," Robert continued after a moment. "It's an incredibly generous gift. More than generous. Dad really helped plan all that?" "Every detail," I confirmed. "He wanted it to be special for both of you, but especially for Vanessa. He knew she sometimes felt like an outsider in our family, and hoped this might help bridge that gap." Robert's expression shifted to something between guilt and revelation. He was trying to include her, while she was... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "Where is Vanessa today?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she was processing everything. "At her sister's," Robert replied. "She's struggling with what happened last night. Her carefully planned evening ended with her looking thoughtless and materialistic in front of the very people she was trying to impress." There was no satisfaction in hearing this, only a weary recognition that sometimes necessary lessons come through uncomfortable experiences. "And what about the cruise?" I asked. "It departs in 3 days." Robert looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "We'd like to go, if you still want us to have it. But there's something we'd like even more." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "We'd like you to come with us. The request was so unexpected that for a moment I thought I'd misheard him. "You want me to join you on your anniversary cruise?" He nodded. "It was Dad's gift too, which means you should be part of it. And honestly, Mom, I think it would be good for Vanessa and you to have extended time together, away from social pressures and expectations, a chance to reset our family dynamics." My immediate instinct was to refuse. Surely an anniversary trip should be for the couple alone? But as I considered it further, I recognized the gesture for what it was, not just an olive branch, but an acknowledgement that marriages exist within the context of extended family relationships, exactly as Charles had believed. "What does Vanessa say about this idea?" I asked, knowing her opinion would be crucial. "It was her suggestion," Robert replied, surprising me once again. "She spent most of last night in tears, Mom, not just about the embarrassment, but because she realized how much thought and love went into a gift from someone she had essentially dismissed. She said she wants the chance to know you, the real you, not the version she constructed in her mind to justify her behavior." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, but years of navigating complex family dynamics had taught me to proceed with caution. "I appreciate that, and it's a generous offer," I said carefully. "But I think you both need this time together first. The cruise should be your anniversary celebration as intended. Perhaps I could join you for the final few days." Relief crossed Robert's face. He had feared outright rejection, but was being offered a compromise instead. "That would be perfect. We could meet you in Santorini for the last 4 days." As we worked out the logistics, I felt a subtle shift in our relationship. For the first time in years, we were having a genuine conversation where neither of us was performing or hiding our true thoughts. There was hurt still being processed, trust being cautiously rebuilt, but also an honesty that had been missing since Charles's death. When Robert finally left, promising to return with Vanessa before their departure, I sat in my garden where Charles and I had spent so many evenings planning family gatherings and celebrations. I could almost hear his voice. "See, Ellie, sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important reconnections." I wasn't naive enough to believe one confrontation and apology had resolved all the underlying tensions in our family. Vanessa's social climbing and Robert's willingness to prioritize her wishes over family bonds hadn't developed overnight, and wouldn't be undone in a single conversation. But something significant had shifted. A truth had been spoken, a boundary established, and surprisingly, a door had been opened rather than closed. As I tended to the rose bushes Charles had planted for our 40th anniversary, I reflected on how growth, in gardens and in relationships, requires both pruning and patience. The painful confrontation at Le Ciel had been necessary pruning. Now would come the patience of watching to see what might bloom from this newly honest foundation. Later that evening, Timothy stopped by on his way back to college. "Dad told me about the cruise compromise," he said, helping himself to leftovers from my refrigerator with the easy familiarity that had always characterized our relationship. "Joining them in Santorini sounds perfect." "You think so?" I asked, genuinely valuing his perspective. As Robert's son from his first marriage, Timothy occupied a unique position in our family constellation, connected to but slightly apart from the dynamics between Robert, Vanessa, and me. "Absolutely," he confirmed, settling at the kitchen table. "It gives them time to process everything, enjoy their anniversary, and genuinely prepare to welcome you. And it gives you the chance to see if their actions match their words before investing too much emotionally." His insight, mature beyond his 20 years, reminded me of Charles. "When did you get so wise about family dynamics?" Timothy's smile was wry. "Probably around the time Dad married someone only 15 years older than me. Creates a certain perspective." We shared a laugh, not mean-spirited, but acknowledging the complex reality of our blended family. As Timothy prepared to leave, he hugged me tightly. Grandma, whatever happens with this cruise, what you did at the restaurant was important. Not just for you, but for Dad, too. He needed to see that allowing someone to disrespect his mother doesn't make him a good husband. It makes him complicit in something he knows is wrong. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. The next few weeks would reveal whether last night's confrontation had truly opened a path to healing or merely exposed wounds too deep to mend. But regardless of the outcome, I had honored Charles's memory, stood firm in my own worth, and perhaps most importantly, modeled for Timothy that love doesn't require accepting disrespect. The cruise documents still sat on my desk, now with additional papers for my own joining of their journey in Santorini. Looking at them, I allowed myself to feel cautious hope, not just for a pleasant vacation, but for the possibility that from this painful moment might emerge a more authentic relationship with my son and daughter-in-law. One based not on social performances and appearances, but on the genuine acceptance Charles had always tried to nurture in our family. Tomorrow, Vanessa would come with Robert to discuss the details. It would be our first meeting since the restaurant confrontation. Whatever happened next would set the tone for this new chapter in our family story, one that had begun with exclusion, but might yet evolve into something stronger and more genuine than what had come before. The afternoon Vanessa was scheduled to come with Robert loomed with a weight of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. I spent the morning baking Charles's famous lemon shortbread cookies, not as a peace offering, but as a reminder of the family traditions that existed long before Vanessa entered our lives. Some might call it passive-aggressive. I preferred to think of it as maintaining perspective. Margaret called just before they were due to arrive. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, arranging the cookies on the blue ceramic plate Charles had brought back from Portugal for our 30th anniversary. "I'm not expecting miracles, just basic civility. And if she can't manage that, then I'll have valuable information about the future of our relationship," I said simply. "Either way, I'll be fine." The doorbell rang precisely at 2:00, Vanessa's. Punctuality was one trait I'd always appreciated. I took a steadying breath before opening the door to find them both standing somewhat awkwardly on my porch. Robert looked tense, but it was Vanessa who caught my attention. Gone was the impeccably styled woman who managed every social interaction with calculated precision. Instead, she appeared genuinely uncomfortable, her designer outfit seeming more like armor than adornment. "Eleanor," she said, using my first name instead of the formal Mother Thompson for the first time in our 5-year relationship. "Thank you for seeing us." I gestured them inside without comment, leading them to the living room where tea and cookies waited. The silence as we settled ourselves wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. More like the cautious neutrality of diplomats meeting after a conflict. Vanessa spoke first, setting her untouched teacup carefully on its saucer. "I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable. Not just the text message, but the pattern of dismissiveness I've shown you since Robert and I married." The directness surprised me. I had expected justifications, perhaps subtle attempts to share blame. This straightforward acknowledgement suggested that the restaurant confrontation had impacted her more deeply than I'd anticipated. "May I ask what prompted this change of heart?" I inquired, not unkindly but unwilling to accept an apology without understanding its foundation. Vanessa glanced at Robert before meeting my gaze. "Honestly, it was Charles's letter that came with the cruise documents. I read it that night after we got home from the restaurant. This was unexpected. I had forgotten about the letter in the aftermath of the confrontation. What about it affected you so strongly?" "He wrote about family legacies," she said quietly. "About how marriages don't just unite two people but connect family histories and traditions. He mentioned specific things he'd observed about me. My interest in European architecture, my fondness for certain wines. details I never realized. He'd noticed during our limited interactions. Robert reached for her hand, and she gripped it tightly before continuing. Charles wrote that he'd arranged special architecture tours in each port and wine tastings, featuring vintages he thought I'd appreciate. He'd noticed things about me that I never gave him credit for seeing. And he ended by saying he hoped this trip would help me feel truly part of the Thompson family legacy. Her voice wavered slightly. All this time, I thought your husband merely tolerated me as Robert's choice. I never realized he was actively trying to build a relationship with me in his quiet way. And in return, I excluded his wife, you, from celebrating the marriage he valued. The revelation of Charles's letter contents struck me deeply. It sounded exactly like him, observant, thoughtful, extending bridges across difficult terrain. Even from beyond, he was still teaching all of us about family. Charles was always better than me at seeing beneath surfaces, I admitted. He would notice things about people that revealed their true interests and passions, not just the image they presented. Robert, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Mom, the cruise means even more knowing how personal Dad's planning was. But we understand if you're not comfortable joining us after everything that's happened. I considered them both carefully. Vanessa's usual perfect posture had softened, her defensive edges temporarily lowered. Robert looked both hopeful and apprehensive, caught between his wife and his mother in a way I had never wanted for him. I think we should try, I said finally. Meeting you in Santorini for the last portion of the trip feels like an appropriate compromise. It gives you privacy for your anniversary celebration, but also honors Charles's wish for family connection. Relief visibly washed over both their faces. We spent the next hour discussing practical arrangements, flights, meeting points, excursions planned for the Santorini portion of the journey. As the conversation progressed, I noticed Vanessa gradually becoming more animated, particularly when discussing the architectural tours Charles had arranged. I still can't believe he remembered my comment about wanting to see Gaudi's work in Barcelona, she marveled. It was one casual remark during a Christmas dinner 3 years ago. Charles never forgot things that mattered to people, I said simply. He believed that paying attention was the most basic form of respect. Something in my phrasing seemed to strike her. She paused, teacup halfway to her lips, and I could almost see the connection forming in her mind between Charles's attentiveness and her own dismissive behavior. As they prepared to leave, Vanessa hesitated by the door while Robert stepped outside to take a phone call. Turning to me with uncharacteristic uncertainty, she asked, "Do you have a copy of Charles's letter?" "Robert has the original, but I'd like to read it again." "I believe I do," I replied, remembering that Charles had always made copies of important correspondence. "I'll look for it tonight." "Thank you." She paused again, seeming to gather courage. "Eleanor, I want you to know that I'm genuinely ashamed of how I've treated you. The cruise revelation made me see myself through others' eyes at that restaurant, and I didn't like what I saw. I can't promise overnight change, but I am committed to doing better." The vulnerability in her admission was something I'd never witnessed from Vanessa before. Whether it would translate to lasting change remained to be seen, but acknowledging the problem was at least a beginning. After they left, I found myself drawn again to Charles's office. There, in his meticulous files, was indeed a copy of the letter he'd written to accompany the cruise gift. Reading it brought fresh tears. His voice seemed to leap from the page, wise and kind and perceptive as ever. One passage particularly stood out. "Family relationships aren't built on grand gestures, but on consistent small kindnesses and genuine interest. This cruise is just a setting. What matters is how you use this time to truly see and hear each other." In the days before Robert and Vanessa's departure, there were several more conversations, some awkward, some surprisingly open. Vanessa asked, About family photos displayed in my living room, showing what seemed like genuine interest in Thompson family stories for the first time. Robert brought over their detailed itinerary, seeking my input on certain excursions based on travels Charles and I had taken years before. These gestures were small but significant, the first tentative stems of what might eventually become stronger: family bonds. I maintained my cautious optimism, aware that true change requires more than a few days of improved behavior in the aftermath of a confrontation. The morning of their departure, they stopped by briefly on their way to the airport. Robert hugged me warmly while Vanessa presented me with a small gift, a journal with my initials embossed on the leather cover. "For your thoughts during our time apart," she explained somewhat awkwardly. "And perhaps for notes about what you'd like to see when you join us in Santorini." It was a thoughtful gesture, albeit slightly impersonal, exactly the kind of gift one gives when trying to rebuild a damaged relationship without quite knowing how. I accepted it with genuine thanks, recognizing the effort it represented. As I watched their car pull away, I felt a complex mix of emotions: hope tempered by realism, optimism shadowed by memory of past disappointments. Margaret, who had insisted on being present for moral support during their visit, stood beside me on the porch. "Well, that went better than I expected," she observed dryly. "Think it will last?" "That depends on whether this is genuine change or just temporary remorse," I replied. 10 days on a cruise ship together will be quite revealing for them both. The next week passed in a blur of preparation for my own journey. Timothy called regularly with updates from his summer internship, always ending our conversations with encouragement about the upcoming reunion in Santorini. Margaret helped me pack, offering commentary on which outfits would show Vanessa that sophisticated style doesn't require designer labels. 3 days before my departure, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a beautiful hand-blown glass ornament in swirling blues and greens, along with a postcard from Barcelona. Vanessa's handwriting covered both sides. "Eleanor saw this and thought of you." The artisan said the blue represents wisdom and the green represents growth. Charles was right about Gaudi's architecture being life-changing. Counting the days until you join us in Santorini. The boat feels incomplete without the person who made this journey possible. Vanessa. The note wasn't elaborate or effusive, but it felt sincere in its simplicity. More telling was that she had taken time during their anniversary trip to select a gift and write a personal message, a small act of consideration that spoke louder than grand apologies. I placed the glass ornament on my bedroom windowsill where morning light would catch its colors. Whether this represented a genuine turning point or merely a momentary improvement remained to be seen. But I allowed myself to hope that Charles's final gift to our family might be the beginning of a more authentic relationship with my daughter-in-law. Duaith. Night before my flight to Greece, I sat in Charles's chair in our garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades remarkably similar to the glass ornament Vanessa had sent. I found myself talking to him as I often did in quiet moments. "You're still bringing people together, even now," I said softly to the evening air. "I don't know if this reconciliation will last, but you've given us all a chance to try again with clearer understanding." In my mind, I could almost hear his gentle response. "That's all anyone can ask for, Ellie. Not perfection, just the willingness to begin again with honesty." As darkness settled around me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before the confrontation at Lisielle. Whatever awaited me in Santorini, genuine connection or merely polite accommodation, I had stood my ground with dignity and opened a door to possible reconciliation. The rest would unfold as it should, one small interaction at a time. Upstairs, my suitcase stood packed and ready by the bedroom door. Within it, carefully wrapped between layers of clothing, was a small, velvet box containing the pocket watch Charles had inherited from his father. It would be my gift to Robert during our time in Santorini, a piece of family history that Charles had always intended for our son. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter in our family story. Not an ending. Relationships are never that simple. But perhaps a course correction toward something more authentic than what had come before. The journey had begun with exclusion and confrontation, but with Charles's posthumous guidance, it might yet lead to genuine understanding. Santorini greeted me with breathtaking views that even the most stunning photographs couldn't capture. As the ferry approached the island, the iconic white buildings with blue domes cascaded down the cliffside like a frozen waterfall against the brilliant azure of the Aegean Sea. Despite my travel fatigue and lingering apprehension about the reunion ahead, I couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude that Charles had selected this magnificent place for our family to reconnect. Robert had arranged for a driver to meet me at the port, holding a sign with Mrs. Thompson written in careful block letters. As we wound our way up the steep, narrow roads toward the hotel, I found myself thinking about how Charles would have loved this place. The history, the architecture, the interplay of natural beauty and human creativity. First time in Greece? The driver asked, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. Yes, I replied. My late husband and I always planned to visit, but somehow never made it here together. He nodded sympathetically. Then you are completing the journey for both of you. This is good. His simple observation struck me as profoundly true. In many ways, this entire experience, from the confrontation at Le Ciel to this moment, was about completing journeys Charles had begun. The cruise he had planned, the family healing he had always worked toward, the bridges he had tried to build between Vanessa and me. The hotel was as spectacular as the brochure had promised. A boutique property perched on the caldera's edge, with unobstructed views of the sea and volcano. The young woman at reception smiled warmly as she checked me in. Your son and his wife are waiting for you on the private terrace of your suite, she informed me. They asked to be notified when you arrived, but I told them I would send you directly up. Family reunions should not happen in lobbies. Her perceptiveness made me wonder if Robert had shared something of our situation, or if she was simply observant, enough to recognize the particular mix of anticipation and anxiety that accompanies complicated family reunions. A hotel attendant escorted me through winding pathways and up several flights of stairs to a stunning suite with its own secluded terrace. As he opened the door, I could see Robert and Vanessa rising from their seats at a table set for lunch, their expressions a mixture of welcome and uncertainty that probably mirrored my own. For a moment, we all stood frozen in an awkward tableau, the weight of our history and the beauty of our surroundings creating a strange dissonance. Then Robert stepped forward, wrapping me in a warm embrace that felt more genuine than any interaction we'd all had in years. You made it, he said simply, his voice catching slightly. Welcome to Santorini, Mom. Vanessa approached more cautiously, but her smile seemed sincere. Eleanor, I'm so glad you're here. The cruise has been incredible, but it feels right that you're with us for this part of the journey. The terrace had been set for an intimate lunch with local delicacies, fresh bread, olives, feta cheese, grilled vegetables, and a chilled bottle of white wine. As we settled around the table, I noticed small touches that suggested thoughtful preparation. Fresh flowers in my favorite color, a cushion placed on what would be my chair for added comfort after the long journey, a small gift bag beside my plate. Open it, Vanessa encouraged, noticing my glance toward the package. It's just a small welcome gift. Inside was a beautiful silk scarf in shades of blue and turquoise that complemented the Aegean view. The local artisan uses natural dyes, she explained. The blue comes from a plant that only grows on volcanic islands. I thought it might be nice for the sunset cruise tomorrow. The gift was both beautiful and appropriate, not overly extravagant or impersonal, but selected with apparent consideration for both the occasion and my preferences. It suggested an attentiveness I hadn't previously experienced from Vanessa. It's lovely, I said sincerely. Thank you. As we shared the meal, Robert and Vanessa took turns describing their cruise journey thus far. Barcelona's architecture that had so captivated Vanessa, the small family winery in Provence where the owner had reminded Robert of his father, the unexpected delight of a classical concert in an ancient Italian amphitheater. Charles thought of everything, Robert marveled, refilling our wine glasses. Every excursion has felt personally tailored to our interests. That was his gift, I agreed. Seeing people clearly enough to know what would truly resonate with them. Vanessa looked thoughtful. I never gave him the chance to know me that well. Our interactions were always so surface level. Yet somehow he saw past that. The honesty in her observation created an opening for the more meaningful conversation we needed to have. As the lunch concluded and we moved to the comfortable seating area at the edge of the terrace, the breathtaking panorama of sea and sky provided a backdrop that somehow made difficult truths easier to express. I've been reflecting a lot during this trip, Vanessa began, her gaze directed toward the horizon rather than at me, perhaps finding it easier to speak candidly without direct eye contact, about why I felt the need to exclude you from our celebration, about the image I've been trying so hard to maintain. She paused, gathering her thoughts. My family didn't have much when I was growing up. My parents worked incredibly hard to ensure I received an education that would provide opportunities they never had. I promised myself I would create a life where status and security were never in question. This glimpse into her background surprised me. In 5 years of knowing her, I had heard very little about her childhood or family origins. When I met Robert, she continued, I saw someone who came from exactly the kind of established, secure family background I had always wanted. But instead of simply appreciating that, I think I developed a kind of defensiveness. As if I needed to prove I belonged in that world by distancing myself from anything that felt too ordinary. Robert reached for her hand, his expression suggesting this level of self-awareness was new territory in their relationship as well. Your home, your traditions, your straightforward way of living, they reminded me too much of what I had worked. So hard to leave behind, Vanessa admitted, finally turning to look at me directly. It wasn't really about you being unsophisticated. It was about my own insecurities. The vulnerability in her confession disarmed me. I had expected perhaps a polite recommitment to better behavior, but not this level of personal insight. Thank you for sharing that with me, I said carefully. It helps me understand your perspective better. The irony, she added with a rueful smile, is that this cruise has shown me how true sophistication looks nothing like what I imagined. The most interesting people we've met, the winemaker in Provence, the archaeologist in Pompeii, the chef, who taught our cooking class in Sicily, all share a quality that reminds me of you and Charles. A kind of authentic engagement with what matters to them, without concern for how it appears to others. Robert, who had been listening intently, added his own perspective. I've realized I've been caught in the middle for years, knowing I was letting you down, Mom, but afraid of disappointing Vanessa if I pushed back against her expectations. I convinced myself it was easier to go along with excluding you than to address the real issues. And how do you feel now? I asked, genuinely curious about his perception of these dynamics. Relieved, he said simply. Like I can finally stop pretending that these tensions don't exist and start actually dealing with them. Being on this cruise, experiencing Dad's thoughtfulness even after he's gone, it's been like having him here, reminding me of what really matters. As the afternoon progressed into evening, our conversation continued, sometimes difficult, occasionally punctuated by laughter, but consistently more honest than any we'd shared in years. We watched the renowned Santorini sunset together from our terrace, the sky blazing with colors that seemed almost too vivid to be real, much like the emotions of the day. When Robert excused himself to make dinner arrangements, I found myself alone with Vanessa for the first time. She seemed more relaxed than I'd ever seen her, the perpetual perfect posture and calculated expressions softened by something that looked like genuine contentment. "I've been unfair to you," she said without preamble. "Judging you based on criteria that don't actually matter." "We've both made assumptions," I acknowledged, deciding that generosity in this moment might be more valuable than absolute accuracy. "Perhaps we can start again with fewer preconceptions." She nodded, then asked hesitantly, "Would you tell me about Charles? The Charles you knew, not just as Robert's father, but as your husband? I realize I've missed the opportunity to know him properly, but I'd like to understand him better through your memories." The request touched me deeply. In that moment, I recognized that perhaps the most meaningful reconciliation wasn't just about addressing past hurts, but about creating new connections based on genuine interest in each other's lives and experiences. As the stars began to appear above the Aegean, I shared stories about Charles that I had never told Vanessa before. How we met when his car broke down near my college campus. His terrible cooking attempts but magnificent bread-baking skills. His habit of leaving small notes for me hidden throughout the house. His unwavering belief that family disagreements should be resolved through understanding rather than victory. Robert returned to find us laughing over the story of Charles's disastrous attempt to build a treehouse for Robert's 10th birthday, a project that had resulted in a broken arm, Charles's, a newfound respect for professional carpenters, and eventually, a perfectly lovely treehouse built with the help of 3 neighbors and several weekends of community effort. "I remember that treehouse," Robert said, joining us with a bottle of local wine. "I had no idea there was such a story behind it. Your father believed that our finest moments often emerge from our most humbling failures," I told him. He would say the treehouse was better for having become a community project rather than a solo accomplishment. As we prepared to leave for dinner at a small taverna Robert had discovered earlier in their trip, I was struck by how different this felt from any previous time with Vanessa and Robert. The careful performance of perfection that had characterized our earlier interactions had been replaced by something more authentic, still evolving, still fragile in many ways, but real. Later that night, after returning to the hotel under a canopy of stars, I stood alone on my portion of the terrace, breathing in the scent of the sea and feeling Charles's presence more vividly than I had since his passing. "You orchestrated this beautifully," I whispered to the night air. "This trip, this reconciliation, it has your touch all over it." The gentle breeze seemed almost like his response, a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts emerge from the most painful confrontations and that family bonds, once authentic, can withstand even the most difficult truths. Tomorrow would bring the sunset cruise Vanessa had mentioned, another opportunity to build on this fragile new foundation. I didn't harbor illusions that one honest conversation had resolved all our differences or healed all our hurts. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful that we were finally seeing each other clearly. Not as characters and roles we'd assigned to one another, but as flawed, complex individuals attempting to create meaningful connection despite our differences. The exclusion from their anniversary celebration, painful as it had been, had ultimately opened a door to something potentially more valuable than any single event, the possibility of a relationship based on truth rather than appearances. As I prepared for sleep, I found myself grateful not just for Charles's final gift of this journey, but for the unexpected wisdom that had come from standing firm in my own worth, even when it required difficult confrontation. The Santorini moon cast silver light across my room as I drifted toward sleep, illuminating the small velvet box containing Charles's pocket watch on my bedside table, tomorrow's gift for Robert, and another thread in the fabric of family legacy we were carefully beginning to reweave together. Morning in Santorini arrived. With spectacular clarity, sunlight dancing across the whitewashed walls and illuminating the deep blue of the caldera below, I woke early, a lifetime habit that even vacation couldn't interrupt, and stepped onto my portion of the terrace with a cup of tea to watch the island come alive. The pocket watch rested in my hands, its gold case catching the morning light. Charles had carried it on special occasions, a family heirloom that had passed from his grandfather to his father to him. I ran my thumb over the engraved initials, CTT, Charles Thomas Thompson, feeling the connection to him and to generations past. Good. "Morning," came Robert's voice, startling me from my reverie. He stood in the doorway connecting our suite sections, already dressed but looking relaxed in a way I rarely saw him back home. "You're up early." "Old habits," I smiled, nodding to the chair beside me. "The morning view is worth it." He joined, me accepting the cup of tea I poured from the small pot I'd prepared. For a few comfortable minutes, we simply sat together watching boats move across the caldera, the silence between us easier than it had been in years. "What's that?" he asked finally, noticing the pocket watch in my hand. I opened my palm, revealing the timepiece fully. "Your father's pocket watch, and his father's before him." Robert's eyes widened in recognition. "Dad always wore it at Christmas and on anniversaries. I remember playing with the chain when I was little." "He wanted you to have it," I said, placing it in his hand. "He planned to give it to you on your 5th anniversary. I thought today would be the right time." Robert opened the case carefully, revealing the watch face with its elegant Roman numerals. What he didn't yet know was that I had added something, a small photograph of Charles holding infant Robert, tucked into the lid of the case where pocket watch owners traditionally kept pictures of loved ones. When he discovered it, his breath caught. "I don't think I've ever seen this photo." "It was taken the day we brought you home from the hospital," I explained. "The first time he held you outside the hospital. He said it was the moment he truly understood what being a father meant." Robert studied the image, emotion evident in his expression. "He looks so young and terrified." "Oh, he was," I laughed softly. "He was convinced he was going to drop you or break you somehow. But look at his eyes. He was already completely in love with you." Carefully closing the watch, Robert held it tightly for a moment before slipping it into his pocket. "Thank you. This means everything." The meaningful moment was interrupted by Vanessa appearing with a breakfast tray. "The hotel said we could have breakfast on our terrace instead of the restaurant," she explained, setting down platters of fresh fruit, yogurt, honey, and pastries. "I thought it might be nice to eat here with this view." Unlike yesterday's slightly nervous demeanor, she moved with a new ease around me, less performative and more natural. Small changes, but noticeable. Her hair pulled back simply rather than elaborately styled, minimal makeup, a casual sundress rather than something designer-labeled and impeccable. "I was just giving Robert his father's pocket watch," I explained. As she joined us, "May I see it?" she asked, her interest seeming genuine. Robert removed it from his pocket, opening the case to show her both the watch and the photograph. Vanessa's expression softened as she looked at the image of Charles with baby Robert. "He has the same expression Robert had when Timothy was born," she observed quietly. That mixture of terror and absolute devotion. The comment surprised me. Vanessa rarely spoke about Timothy or acknowledged Robert's first marriage and family. This casual reference suggested a softening of boundaries I hadn't anticipated. As we shared breakfast, our conversation flowed more naturally than ever before. We discussed the day's plans, the sunset cruise, a visit to a local winery, dinner at a traditional taverna, but also deeper topics. Robert shared memories of his father that Vanessa had never heard. I offered stories of my early marriage to Charles, including our financial struggles that seemed to surprise Vanessa. "You were on a teacher's salary, and Dad was still finishing graduate school," Robert reminded me. "I remember that tiny apartment with the leaky ceiling." "We could barely afford groceries some months," I acknowledged. "Your father took on tutoring jobs in the evenings after his classes. I sewed clothes for extra income." Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. I always assumed, by the time I met you both, you seemed so established. That came much later, I explained. We worked very hard for decades to build financial security. The comfortable retirement and ability to plan trips like this cruise, those were the result of years of careful planning and sacrifice. Something shifted in her expression. A recognition, perhaps, that the security she had married into had not simply appeared, but had been built through persistent effort and time. It was a small moment of connection, an acknowledgement that perhaps our backgrounds weren't as different as she had always assumed. The sunset cruise that evening proved to be everything Charles had promised in his planning. A private yacht took us along the caldera, offering spectacular views of the island from the water. The captain, a weathered local man named Nikos, shared stories of Santorini's volcanic history and cultural heritage as we glided across the impossibly blue water. Watched Robert and Vanessa throughout the evening, noting the subtle changes in their interaction. His hand rested comfortably on her back as they stood at the railing, her head occasionally leaning against his shoulder. Small gestures of authentic affection rather than the calculated public displays I'd often observed at their social functions, as the sun began its spectacular descent, casting gold and crimson across the sea. Nikos opened a bottle of local wine and proposed a toast. "To family," he said simply, raising his glass toward the three of us. "The strongest foundation in uncertain times." We touched glasses, the crystal catching the sunset's fire. In that moment, something unspoken passed between the three of us, a recognition that we were, despite our differences and past hurts, family. Imperfect and complicated, but connected by bonds that deserved nurturing rather than performance. Later, as we returned to shore under a canopy of emerging stars, Vanessa moved to sit beside me at the back of the yacht, while Robert engaged in conversation with Nikos at the helm. "I've been wondering," she began hesitantly, "if you might consider helping me with something when we return home." "What kind of something?" I asked, curious about this unexpected request. "Robert mentioned you used to host these amazing family dinners on Sundays, with traditional recipes passed down through generations. I'd like to learn how to continue that tradition." The request caught me completely off guard. Vanessa had always seemed dismissive of what she called my quaint domestic talents, preferring catered events to home cooking, professional decorators to personal touches. "You want to learn family recipes?" I clarified, making sure I understood correctly. She nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "I realized something during this trip. All those social connections I've been so focused on cultivating, they're mostly superficial. The people at that anniversary dinner at Le Ciel? Most of them wouldn't think twice about me if I stopped being useful for their careers or social standing." She looked toward Robert, her expression softening. "But family, real family, that's different. I never really had that growing up. My parents loved me, but they worked constantly. There were no Sunday dinners or holiday traditions or heirloom recipes." Understanding dawned slowly. Beneath Vanessa's pursuit of status and sophistication had been a deeper longing for the very sense of belonging and tradition she had seemed to reject in our family. "I would be happy to teach you," I said simply. "Charles always said the recipes weren't nearly as important as the stories shared around the table while enjoying them." "That's what I want," she admitted quietly. "Not just the food, but the history and connection that comes with it." In that simple exchange, a door opened between us. Not just to cooking lessons, but to the possibility of a genuine relationship built on shared values rather than surface appearances. The remainder of our time in Santorini unfolded with a natural ease I wouldn't have thought possible before this trip. We explored ancient ruins together, Robert explaining historical details with enthusiasm while Vanessa photographed architectural elements that captivated her. I found myself sharing stories about places Charles and I had visited, insights he had offered, dreams we had shared for retirement travels we never got to complete together. On our final evening, Robert arranged a private dinner on our terrace, complete with local specialties and musicians playing traditional Greek instruments. Under the stars, with the lights of the caldera villages twinkling like earthbound constellations below us, we toasted Charles's memory and the gift his planning had given us, not just a luxury vacation, but an opportunity for genuine reconciliation. "I've been thinking," Robert said as the evening drew to a close, "about continuing Dad's tradition of planning meaningful family experiences." "What did you have in mind?" I asked, curious about this new thoughtfulness in my son. "For Christmas? This year, instead of the usual rushed dinner between other obligations, what if we rented that cabin in the mountains Dad always loved? The one where we could see the stars through the skylights. We could spend a few days there, you, me, Vanessa, and Timothy. Maybe even invite Timothy's mother if she's comfortable with that." The suggestion, inclusive, thoughtful, focused on experience rather than appearance, showed just how much had shifted during this journey. The Robert who had allowed me to be excluded from his anniversary celebration would never have proposed such a family-centered holiday, let alone considered including his ex-wife in the gathering. "I think that sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "Charles would approve entirely." Vanessa nodded in agreement. "I'd like to help plan it, not to take over," she added quickly, "but to contribute. Maybe I could research some winter activities in the area that we could all enjoy together." Her careful qualification, "not to take over," revealed her awareness of past behavior patterns and desire to change them. It was these small moments of self-recognition that gave me the most hope for lasting transformation in our relationship We prepared to part ways the next morning, Robert and Vanessa continuing to their final cruise destination while I began my journey home. There was none of the awkwardness that had characterized our previous goodbyes. Instead, there were genuine embraces, promises to call that I actually believed would be kept, and a sense of anticipation about our next gathering rather than dread. Vanessa hugged me last, holding on a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on us even when we gave you every reason to." "Family is worth fighting for," I replied simply, "even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." As my plane lifted off from the small Santorini airport later that day, I watched the magnificent island recede below me, its white buildings and blue domes becoming miniature against the vast expanse of sea. The journey that had begun with exclusion and confrontation had transformed into something I hadn't dared hope for. The beginning of authentic family bonds based on genuine understanding rather than obligation or appearance. Charles's final gift had been not just the cruise itself, but the opportunity it created for all of us to see beyond our established patterns and assumptions. The expensive anniversary dinner at Le Ciel, the one I had been deemed too unsophisticated to attend, now seemed a hollow simulation of celebration compared to the genuine connection we had found among the cliffs and waters of Santorini. I opened my carry-on bag, removing the journal Vanessa had given me before their departure. I had used it throughout my stay, recording not just observations about places we visited, but insights about our evolving relationships. On the final page, I wrote, simply, "The most valuable legacy we leave is not financial security or social status, but the quality of our connections with those we love." Charles understood this always. The rest of us are learning it now, together. As the clouds enveloped the plane, I closed the journal with a sense of profound gratitude. For Charles's foresight, for my own courage in confronting disrespect, for Robert and Vanessa's willingness to grow, and for the unexpected journey from exclusion to belonging that had transformed us all. Returning home after transformative travel always feels strange, the familiar surroundings unchanged while you yourself have been fundamentally altered. As my taxi pulled into the driveway of the house Charles and I had shared for decades, I felt this dissonance acutely. The building looked exactly as I had left it, but I was returning as someone different. someone who had confronted painful truths and discovered unexpected possibilities for healing. Margaret was waiting on the porch, having insisted on being there when I arrived. Her eagerness for details was evident in her expression as she hurried down the steps to help with my luggage. "Well?" she demanded the moment I stepped out of the taxi. "Don't keep me in suspense. Was it awful, bearable, actually decent?" "It was—" I paused, searching for the right word. "Transformative." She looked skeptical as she followed me inside. "You're going to need to be more specific than that. I've been imagining everything from icy politeness to full-scale family meltdowns." Over tea in my kitchen, the same ritual we had shared when discussing the original exclusion from the anniversary dinner, I recounted the journey. Margaret's expressions shifted from disbelief to cautious optimism as I described the changes I had witnessed in both Robert and Vanessa. "The cooking lessons request is what gets me," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "That's not just making nice, that's a genuine pivot." "It surprised me too," I admitted. "But I think it's less about cooking specifically and more about what it represents: tradition, belonging, continuity." Things she claimed to find hopelessly outdated before, Margaret pointed out. "People are complicated," I said simply. "Sometimes what we reject most vocally is what we secretly long for." Margaret studied me with the perceptiveness that comes from decades of friendship. "You've changed too, you know. There's a certain peace about you that wasn't there before." Her observation resonated with my own sense of internal shift. The confrontation at Le Ciel had required a courage I hadn't been certain I possessed. Standing up for my dignity in that moment had awakened something that had been dormant since Charles's death. A clarity about my own worth that existed independently of others' validation. I think I needed to discover that I could handle painful truths, I reflected. That advocating for myself wouldn't destroy relationships worth keeping. In the days that followed, evidence of genuine change continued to appear. Robert called regularly with updates on their final cruise destinations. Timothy stopped by with questions about the mountain cabin Christmas gathering. His enthusiasm, suggesting Robert had already discussed the plan with him. Most surprisingly, Vanessa sent handwritten postcards from their remaining ports, brief but personal notes that acknowledged our new understanding without overplaying it. 2 weeks after my return, they appeared on my doorstep with a large, carefully wrapped package. Standing together on my porch, they looked remarkably different from the couple who had excluded me from their anniversary celebration. More relaxed, more authentic, more connected to each other. "Welcome home," I greeted them, genuinely pleased to see them. "Come in." As we settled in the living room with refreshments, Vanessa seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "We brought you something," she explained, nodding toward the package Robert was placing on the coffee table. "It's not just a souvenir, it's something more meaningful." Robert encouraged me to unwrap it, watching expectantly as I removed the layers of tissue paper. Inside was an exquisite hand-painted ceramic plate, clearly of Greek origin, with a scene of Santorini's whitewashed buildings against the blue sea. "It's beautiful," I said sincerely, appreciating the artistry. "Thank you." "Turn it over," Vanessa suggested quietly. On the back, the artist had inscribed 3 words in elegant script: "Family above appearances." "We had it custom-made," Robert explained. "Those words kept coming up during our conversations after you left. How focusing on appearances nearly cost us the authentic family connection that actually matters." The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just its beauty, but the meaningful phrase that acknowledged our shared journey, moved me deeply. "We'd like it to be the first piece in a new tradition," Vanessa added, her usual confidence tempered with a vulnerability I was still getting used to. "Each significant family gathering, we add a piece that reflects something meaningful we've learned or experienced together." The suggestion represented everything that had shifted in our relationship. a focus on substance over surface, on building meaningful traditions rather than impressive displays, on acknowledging our imperfect journey rather than maintaining a facade of perfection. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said warmly. As the visit continued, I noticed subtle but significant changes in how we interacted. Robert spoke more openly about his father, sharing memories without the awkward hesitation that had characterized previous mentions of Charles. Vanessa asked questions about family photographs, genuinely interested in the stories behind them, rather than viewing them as outdated decor. Most notably, they didn't check their phones once, a sharp contrast to previous visits when social media updates and work emails had constantly interrupted conversation. Before they left, Vanessa asked if we could schedule our first cooking lesson the following weekend. "I thought we might start with Charles's famous lemon chicken," she suggested. "Robert says it was a Sunday tradition for years." The request confirmed what I had begun to hope during our time in Santorini, that the changes I'd witnessed weren't merely vacation-induced temporary adjustments, but the beginning of genuine transformation. "I'd like that," I agreed. "And yes, that chicken recipe would be perfect to start with. It was the first dish Charles mastered when we were newlyweds." As they prepared to leave, Robert hung back slightly, letting Vanessa go ahead to the car. "Mom, I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his expression serious. "The night you came to Le Ciel, how did you find the courage to do that? I'm not sure I could have faced that kind of confrontation." The question revealed a new level of reflection I hadn't previously seen in my son. A willingness to examine not just others' actions, but his own character and choices. "I think courage often comes from clarity," I answered thoughtfully. Once, I realized that accepting disrespect wouldn't preserve our relationship but only distort it further. The path forward became clear. Difficult, but clear. He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I've been thinking a lot about the kind of man Dad was, how he maintained his principles without alienating people. I haven't always managed that balance very well." "Your father wasn't perfect," I reminded him gently. "He made plenty of mistakes, especially when he was younger. What made him exceptional was his willingness to learn from them." This perspective seemed to comfort Robert. The expectation of immediate perfection can be paralyzing. The permission to learn and grow opens the door to actual improvement. "Thank you," he said simply, embracing me before joining Vanessa at the car. As I watched them drive away, I was struck by how different this departure felt from all previous ones. Instead of relief that a stressful obligation had been completed, I felt a genuine warmth and anticipation of our next gathering. The distance between us, emotional rather than geographic, had begun to close in ways I hadn't dared hope for when I walked into Le Ciel with those cruise documents. The following weekend brought our first cooking lesson. Vanessa arrived punctually, dressed in casual clothes with her hair simply pulled back, a marked contrast to her usual carefully curated appearance for any social interaction. Most surprisingly, she brought Timothy with her. "Hope you don't mind an extra student," she said as they entered my kitchen. When I mentioned the cooking lesson to Timothy, he said he'd always wanted to learn his grandfather's recipes too. The inclusion of Timothy, acknowledging and embracing Robert's first family rather than minimizing it, was perhaps the most significant indicator of genuine change I had yet witnessed. Throughout Charles's illness and after his death, Vanessa had maintained a polite but distinct distance from Timothy, treating him as Robert's obligation rather than a member of their shared family. The more the merrier, I welcomed them genuinely, pleased by this development. Charles always said good food tastes better when more hands have contributed to making it. The afternoon unfolded with surprising ease and moments of unexpected connection. Timothy shared memories of cooking with his grandfather that even I hadn't heard. Vanessa revealed a natural talent for herb combinations that Charles would have appreciated. As the kitchen filled with the familiar aroma of lemon and rosemary, I felt Charles's presence more strongly than I had since before his death. not in sorrow, but in the continuation of traditions he had valued. "I have something to show you both," I said as the chicken roasted. Leading them to Charles's office, I retrieved a leather-bound book from his desk drawer. Charles kept a cookbook of sorts, not just recipes, but stories about where they came from, who taught him each dish, special occasions when we served them. The book, filled with Charles's distinctive handwriting, food stains marking particularly favored pages, margin notes documenting adaptations over the years, was a tangible piece of family history I had been unsure about sharing until now. "This is incredible," Timothy said reverently, turning pages filled with his grandfather's thoughts and experiences. Vanessa traced the handwritten instructions with careful fingers. "This is so much more meaningful than any professional cookbook. You can feel the love and history in every page. Charles meant for it to be passed down," I explained. "He kept adding to it until the week before he died, wanting to leave as complete a record as possible." As they explored the book together, I observed the unexpected tableau they created. Timothy and Vanessa, connected through their shared interest in this family legacy, finding common ground I had never anticipated. The wooden family table that had witnessed 4 decades of Thompson gatherings now hosted this new constellation of relationships, not erasing the complexity and past hurts, but creating space for something healthier to grow alongside them. When Robert arrived to join us for dinner, having finished work earlier than expected, he paused in the doorway of the kitchen. The sight of his son, his wife, and his mother laughing together as they put final touches on his father's signature dish clearly affected him deeply. "What is it?" I asked quietly, joining him while the others remained absorbed in their task. "This is what Dad always wanted," he said, emotion evident in his voice. Not just everyone getting along, but genuinely connecting, sharing what matters. The meal we shared that evening, at the table where Robert had grown up, eating food prepared by 4 pairs of hands spanning 3 generations, felt like the true celebration that the exclusive gathering at Le Ciel had attempted but failed to create. We toasted Charles's memory, shared stories that made us both laugh and cry, and began planning the Christmas gathering at the mountain cabin in earnest. As Timothy helped clear the table afterward, he said something that captured perfectly the journey we had all been on. "You know what's weird? If Vanessa hadn't sent that awful text excluding you from their anniversary dinner, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes." His observation echoed in my mind later that night as I sat alone in my garden, surrounded by plants Charles and I had tended together for decades. The painful exclusion that had prompted my confrontation at Le Ciel had indeed become a catalyst for authentic connection. Not because pain itself is valuable, but because how we respond to it can create unexpected openings for growth and transformation. The ceramic plate from Santorini now hung on my dining room wall, the first piece in our new family collection, a visible reminder of the journey from exclusion to belonging, from performance to authenticity. Its inscription, "Family above appearances," served as both acknowledgement of past mistakes and commitment to different priorities moving forward. As stars appeared in the evening sky, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the reconciliation with Robert and Vanessa, but for the clarity I had found within myself. The courage to confront painful truths had revealed a strength I hadn't been certain remained after Charles's death. I had discovered that standing firmly in my own worth didn't require bitterness or rejection of others, but rather created the foundation for more honest and meaningful connection. Charles had always maintained that family relationships were worth the difficult conversations they sometimes required. "The easy silence of avoidance," he would say, "costs more in the end than the temporary discomfort of truth." His wisdom had guided my decision to confront the exclusion directly, rather than quietly accepting it. And now, that difficult moment at Le Ciel had blossomed into something none of us could have anticipated. The beginning of a family relationship based on authenticity rather than appearance, on genuine appreciation rather than obligation. The BIA anniversary celebration from which I had been excluded was now a distant memory, far less significant than the transformative journey it had unexpectedly initiated. Sometimes, I reflected, the most meaningful gifts arrive in the most painful packages, not because suffering itself has value, but because how we respond to it can open doors we never knew existed. 6 months had passed since that fateful night at Le Ciel when I had walked in with cruise documents and upended our family dynamics. Winter had settled over our town, dusting the landscape with snow that reminded me of Santorini's whitewashed buildings, a different kind of beauty, but no less breathtaking. The promised Christmas gathering at the mountain cabin was approaching, and my living room had become command central for planning what had evolved into a significant family event. Timothy sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old photo albums to create what he called a Thompson family through the years display. Vanessa worked at the dining table, reviewing meal plans that incorporated several of Charles's recipes she had mastered during our weekly cooking sessions. Robert was due to arrive shortly with the final supplies for the 5-day retreat. "Grandma, look at this," Timothy called, holding up a faded photograph. "Is this Dad building a snowman with Grandpa?" I joined him on the floor, my knees protesting slightly as I settled beside him. "Yes, that was at this same cabin when your father was about 10. Charles always said it was the perfect snowman, not because it looked perfect, but because they had so much fun making it." Timothy studied the image thoughtfully. "We should recreate this photo. Dad and me building a snowman in the same spot." "I love that idea," Vanessa said, looking up from her notes. "We could do a whole series of then and now photos." Her enthusiasm for family continuity, for honoring traditions and creating connections between past and present, continued to surprise and touch me. The sophisticated socialite who had once dismissed family gatherings as quaint now approached them with genuine interest and creativity. When Robert arrived, laden with bags from his supply run, he was accompanied by an unexpected guest, Ellen, Timothy's mother and Robert's first wife. She stood somewhat awkwardly in the doorway, clearly uncertain of her welcome despite the invitation. "Ellen offered to help with the preparations," Robert explained. "Since she'll be joining us for part of the cabin stay, I thought she might want to be involved in the planning too." This development, Robert and Vanessa not only including Ellen in the gathering, but welcoming her into the preparation process, represented perhaps the most profound shift in our family system. The careful compartmentalization that had once characterized their approach to his first family and his current family had given way to a more integrated and generous perspective. I greeted Ellen warmly, genuinely glad to see her included. Though our relationship had remained cordial after her divorce from Robert, it had never been particularly close. Now, as we all gathered around my dining table to finalize plans, I sensed the possibility of new connections forming across previously rigid boundaries. "I brought something that might be useful," Ellen said, pulling a folder from her bag. "Photos from the times Timothy and I visited the cabin when he was little. I thought they might help with Timothy's display project." As Timothy eagerly explored these images he'd never seen, Robert and Vanessa exchanged a glance that spoke volumes about their growth. 6 months ago, such an offering from Ellen would have been met with polite acknowledgement at best, subtle resistance at worst. Now they recognized it for what it was, another thread in the complex tapestry of family history they were all part of. Later, as Ellen helped Vanessa prepare lunch in the kitchen, I overheard a conversation that would have been unimaginable before the cruise revelation. "I never properly thanked you," Vanessa was saying quietly, "for how gracious you've been about Timothy's relationship with us. It would have been easy to discourage him from spending time with me, especially in the beginning when I wasn't particularly welcoming." "We all want what's best for Timothy," Ellen replied simply. And that includes having positive relationships with all his parents and grandparents. It just took some of us longer than others to recognize that. The gentle challenge in her words was offered without rancor, and I heard Vanessa's soft laugh. In response, I deserved that. But I'm learning, albeit embarrassingly late. This conversation, taking place in my kitchen between two women who had every reason for conflict but were choosing connection instead, exemplified the ripple effects of the transformation that had begun with that confrontation at Le Ciel. The courage to speak truth had created space for authenticity that extended beyond my relationship with Robert and Vanessa to touch other family connections as well. As Christmas approached, the preparation gatherings at my home became more frequent and increasingly joyful. The ceramic plate from Santorini had been joined by a second piece in our new collection, a handcrafted wooden picture frame Timothy had made, containing a photo of the four of us in Greece. Its inscription read simply, "New Beginnings." The most profound evidence of change, however, came unexpectedly one evening when Robert arrived alone, asking if we could talk privately. Something in his expression reminded me of his childhood self coming to confess a mistake or ask for help with a difficult decision. "What is it?" I asked as we settled in Charles's study, the room that still felt most connected to his presence. Robert took a deep breath, clearly gathering courage. "I've been thinking a lot about character lately, about the kind of man Dad was and the kind of man I want to be, about integrity and how easy it is to lose sight of it when you're focusing on the wrong things." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When you confronted us at Le Ciel, it was like seeing myself through someone else's eyes for the first time in years. I didn't like what I saw." The raw honesty in his words touched me deeply. Personal reckoning is perhaps the hardest kind of truth-telling, requiring a courage different from but equal to confronting others. The man who would allow his mother to be excluded from his celebration to appease his wife's social aspirations, "That's not who I want to be," he continued. "But it's who I had become, bit by bit, choice by choice." "We all drift from our values sometimes," I said gently. "What matters is recognizing it and finding our way back." "That's just it," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "I don't think I would have found my way back without your willingness to confront us. It would have been easier for you to just accept the exclusion, to tell yourself it wasn't worth making a scene. But you loved me, loved us, enough to risk discomfort for the sake of truth." His insight brought tears to my eyes. "Your father always said that real love sometimes requires difficult conversations." He was right, Robert acknowledged. "And I've realized something important about that night. What you did wasn't just about standing up for yourself, though it was certainly that. It was also an act of love toward me, and even toward Vanessa. You cared enough about our character and our family bonds to not let us continue down that path, unchallenged." This perspective, that confrontation can itself be an expression of love rather than merely self-defense, struck me profoundly. Charles had understood this, but I had never articulated it so clearly to myself. "I've made a decision," Robert continued after a moment. "I'm leaving the corporate law firm after the new year." The announcement caught me completely by surprise. Robert's position at the prestigious firm had been a source of pride and identity for him for over a decade. "What brought this on?" I asked carefully. "A lot of reflection," he replied. "The values driving that environment, status, billable hours, connections with the right people, those are the same values that led to decisions like excluding you from our celebration. I've been compromising what matters most for what impresses most. What will you do instead?" I was curious rather than concerned. At 45, Robert had many productive years ahead. "I'm joining a smaller practice that focuses on elder law and family advocacy," he explained, a new energy in his voice. "The work is meaningful, the hours are sustainable, and the culture aligns with who I actually want to be." The decision represented far more than a career change. It was a realignment of his life with values that had been overshadowed but never fully extinguished. I recognized Charles's influence in this choice, not as pressure, but as example. "Your father would be proud," I said simply. "Not because of what kind of law you'll practice, but because you're making choices based on who you want to be rather than what others expect." As Robert prepared to leave, he handed me a small package. "This is an early Christmas gift. I'd like you to open it now, if that's okay." Inside was a beautiful journal bound in soft leather. The first page contained a handwritten note. "Mom, your courage in confronting us at Le Ciel taught me that some moments are worth remembering not because they are comfortable, but because they are transformative. This journal is for you to record your thoughts about our family journey, past, present, and future. Your perspective matters, your wisdom is valued, and your voice deserves to be preserved. With love and gratitude, Robert." The acknowledgement of my voice, the very thing that had been dismissed when I was excluded from their celebration, felt like the completion of a circle. The confrontation that began with me asserting my right to be heard had led to a deeper recognition of the value of my perspective. The Christmas gathering at the mountain cabin exceeded even my most hopeful expectations. Snow fell gently outside while inside, the large stone fireplace cast warm light over our expanded family circle. Robert and Vanessa, Timothy and Ellen, Margaret, who joined for 2 days, and me. The walls were adorned with Timothy's photo display, creating a visual timeline of Thompson family history across generations. True to his word, Timothy recreated the snowman photo with Robert, their creations standing side by side, just as Charles and Robert's had decades earlier. Vanessa documented everything, no longer focusing on curated perfection, but capturing authentic moments. Laughter around the dinner table, Ellen teaching Timothy to play chess, Robert reading aloud from Charles's favorite book as we all listened, by firelight. On Christmas Eve, we added the third piece to our family collection, a hand-carved wooden ornament from the cabin's gift shop, inscribed with "Family Redefined" and the date. It hung on the small pine tree we had decorated together, catching the firelight alongside heirloom ornaments from Christmases past. As everyone gathered for the dinner Vanessa and I had prepared together, Charles's recipes alongside new traditions we were creating, I took a moment to absorb the scene. The journey from that painful text message excluding me from their anniversary to this moment of genuine connection had been neither straight nor simple. There had been uncomfortable conversations, painful recognitions, tentative steps forward, and occasional steps back. Yet something authentic had emerged from that difficult beginning. Not perfect, still evolving, but real in a way that our previous careful performances had never been. The confrontation at Le Ciel had cracked the facade of artificial harmony to reveal the possibility of genuine understanding beneath. Later that night, as everyone else slept, I sat by the cabin window watching snow continue to fall in the moonlight. I opened Robert's journal gift and began to write, recording not just what had happened, but what it had meant. The journey from exclusion to belonging, from appearance to authenticity, from painful truth to healing transformation. As I wrote, I realized that what Charles and I had created together wasn't just financial security or even cherished traditions, but a foundation of values strong enough to withstand the earthquake of his loss and resilient enough to support healing after breach. His final gift, the cruise that had become a vehicle for reconciliation, had been perfectly characteristic of his approach to family, providing opportunity for connection without forcing specific outcomes. The legacy that would continue beyond, all of us wasn't contained in property or possessions, but in this capacity for both honesty and forgiveness, for standing firmly in one's worth while remaining open to genuine change in others. As I closed the journal and prepared for sleep, I felt profound gratitude, not just for the healing that had occurred, but for the courage to seek truth that had made healing possible in the first place. My son's wife had told me I couldn't attend. their anniversary celebration because I wasn't sophisticated enough. I had revealed the surprise vacation planned for them as an act of both self-respect and love. And from that difficult moment had emerged the most meaningful gift of all, a family finding its way back to authenticity, one honest conversation at a time. 1 year had passed since that text message from Vanessa declaring me too unsophisticated for their anniversary celebration at Le Ciel. As I prepared for the small gathering in my garden, celebration of my 73rd birthday, I marveled at how profoundly our family had transformed in just 12 months. The weather had cooperated beautifully, providing sunshine and a gentle breeze that rustled through the roses Charles had planted years ago. Margaret arrived early to help with final arrangements, though help mostly involved offering commentary while I adjusted flower arrangements and checked the table settings. "I still can't believe how much has changed," she remarked, sampling a canapé from the platter Vanessa had dropped off earlier. "If someone had told me last year that your daughter-in-law would be making food for your birthday and genuinely excited about celebrating you, I'd have thought they were delusional." "Life takes unexpected turns," I replied, a phrase that had become something of a personal motto. Sometimes the most painful moments create openings for growth we couldn't have imagined. Margaret studied me thoughtfully. "You know what impresses me most? That you've allowed the relationship to evolve authentically, without either holding grudges or pretending the hurt never happened." Her observation captured precisely what had made our family healing genuine rather than superficial. We hadn't erased the painful history or created an artificial harmony based on avoidance. Instead, we had acknowledged the breach and worked deliberately to build something healthier in its aftermath. The sound of cars arriving interrupted our conversation. Through the garden gate came Timothy first, carrying a large wrapped package, followed by Robert and Vanessa. Behind them, to my surprise, was Ellen, accompanied by her new husband James, whom I had met only twice before. "Happy birthday, Mom." Robert embraced me warmly. "Hope you don't mind the extra guests. Ellen and James were visiting Timothy this weekend, and Vanessa thought we should include them." This casual inclusion, Vanessa initiating the extension of our family circle, represented how far we had traveled from the rigid boundaries and social calculations of a year ago. "Of course I don't mind." I welcomed them all. "The more the merrier." Vanessa approached with a cake box from my favorite local bakery. "I picked this up on my way over," she explained. "And I have those lemon tarts cooling at home. I'll bring them for Sunday dinner tomorrow." The easy mention of our now regular Sunday family dinners, a tradition we had revived from when Robert was growing up, felt both ordinary and remarkable. What had once been dismissed as quaint and old-fashioned had become a cherished weekly gathering that everyone arranged their schedules to attend. As we settled in the garden, I noticed something different about Vanessa. Beyond the now familiar relaxed demeanor and simpler style she had adopted since Santorini, there was a new quality to her presence I couldn't immediately identify. Timothy solved the mystery as he helped serve drinks. "Should we wait to tell Grandma, or?" he asked, glancing between his father and Vanessa. Robert looked to Vanessa, who nodded with a smile I had never seen before, radiant with a quiet joy unlike her former calculated social expressions. "Mom," Robert began, moving to stand beside Vanessa, "we have some news we'd like to share with you first before we tell anyone else." Vanessa's hand moved instinctively to rest on her abdomen, and suddenly I understood. "We're expecting a baby," she confirmed, her voice tinged with wonder. "I'm almost 3 months along." The announcement stunned me into momentary silence. At 42, Vanessa had always maintained that children weren't part of her life plan. Robert had accepted this, having already experienced fatherhood with Timothy. This change represented something profound in their relationship and priorities. "That's wonderful news," I finally managed, emotion making my voice unsteady. "I'm so happy for you both." As Margaret offered congratulations and Ellen expressed her delight for Timothy having a half-sibling, I noticed the tender way Robert's hand rested on Vanessa's shoulder, protective and connected in a way I had never observed before their transformation. "Wanted you to be the first to know," Vanessa said, joining me as the others moved toward the food table. It felt right somehow. "Thank you for that," I replied sincerely. "May I ask what changed your mind about having children? You've always been so certain it wasn't for you." She considered the question thoughtfully. "A lot of things, really. Partly spending more time with Timothy these past months and seeing what a wonderful young man he is. Partly recognizing that my previous objections were more about maintaining a certain lifestyle and image than about the actual experience of parenthood." She glanced toward Robert, who was deep in conversation with Timothy and James. "But mostly, I think it's that our relationship has become something I actually want to build a family within. Before, we were two people maintaining a joint social facade. Now we're genuine partners. That changes everything." Her insight struck me as remarkably self-aware, a quality Vanessa had developed considerably over the past year. The woman who had once been primarily concerned with appearances had become capable of profound reflection about her own motivations and choices. As lunch progressed, the conversation flowed naturally between serious topics and playful banter. Ellen shared stories about Robert as a young father that had Vanessa laughing unreservedly. Timothy and James discovered a shared interest in historical architecture. Margaret regaled everyone with tales from our college days that had Robert covering his ears in mock horror. When it came time for gifts, Timothy insisted his be opened first. The large package revealed a beautifully crafted display cabinet with glass doors. "It's for the family collection," he explained. "I made it in my woodworking class. This way, the pieces can be properly displayed but still visible." The thoughtfulness of the gift, acknowledging and honoring the tradition that had emerged from our reconciliation, moved me deeply. Inside, he had already placed the 3 existing pieces, the ceramic plate from Santorini inscribed with "Family Above Appearances," the photo frame with "New Beginnings," and the wooden ornament marked "Family Redefined." Robert and Vanessa's gift came next, a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature pocket watch. "To commemorate Dad's final gift that changed everything," Robert explained. "We've ordered additional charms to add on significant dates." Each gift that followed reflected genuine thought and personal connection rather than obligation or impression, but it was the final presentation that caught me most by surprise. Vanessa handed me a slim envelope with uncharacteristic hesitation. "This is something a little different," she explained. "More of a request than a gift, really." Inside was a beautiful card containing a handwritten note. "Dear Eleanor, as we prepare to welcome a new life into our family, I find myself thinking about legacy and belonging. Our child will have Robert's family name, but I would be honored if you would consider allowing us to use Charles as a first name if we have a boy, or Charlotte if we have a girl. The values Charles embodied, integrity, generosity, and unwavering commitment to family, are precisely what we hope to nurture in our child. Having come to understand the man he was through your stories and Robert's memories, I can think of no better namesake. With deep appreciation for the family I am truly becoming part of. Vanessa." The request brought tears to my eyes, not just for the honor it represented for Charles, but for what it revealed about Vanessa's transformation. The woman who had once seemed determined to distance herself from our family history now sought to embed her child within that very legacy. I would be deeply honored, I managed through emotion, and Charles would be too. As the gathering continued, into early evening, with lanterns illuminating the garden as dusk approached, I found a quiet moment to observe the scene from a slight distance. There sat Margaret, regaling Timothy and James with stories that had them both laughing uproariously. Ellen and Vanessa bent their heads together over the ultrasound photo Vanessa had brought, former wife and current wife finding connection in shared experience. Robert moved between conversations, refilling glasses and looking more at peace than I had seen him in years. This was not the artificially perfect family image that Vanessa had once been so determined to project. With everyone playing assigned roles and maintaining appropriate facades, it was messier, more complex, and infinitely more authentic, a gathering of imperfect people making deliberate choices to connect despite complications and past hurts. As if sensing my reflective mood, Robert joined me at the garden's edge. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said quietly. "I was thinking earlier about last year, about how different everything was." "It's remarkable what can change in a year," I agreed. "I keep coming back to that night at Le Ciel," he admitted. "How awful it was in the moment, and how necessary it turned out to be. If you hadn't had the courage to confront us like that." "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is speak difficult truths," I observed. "Your father understood that." "Better than most." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately with the baby coming. About what kind of father and husband he was, what I learned from him that I want to pass on. He wasn't perfect," I reminded him gently. "None of us are." "That's what makes his example so valuable," Robert replied. "He showed me that being a good man isn't about perfection. It's about the willingness to acknowledge mistakes and keep trying to do better." As twilight deepened, our gathering showed no signs of dispersing. Timothy produced a portable speaker and started playing music, a playlist that ranged from Charles's favorite jazz standards to contemporary songs, bridging generations just as our family was learning to do. When Vanessa spontaneously pulled Robert to his feet for an impromptu dance on the lawn, I was struck by the genuine joy between them. Their movements were neither calculated for observers nor performed for social media, just two people sharing a moment of connection in the presence of people they trusted. Ellen approached, offering me a cup of tea as we watched them. "It's something, isn't it?" she observed. "Seeing relationships transform like this." "It is indeed," I agreed. "I never expected to find myself here with all of us together like this." "That's what I admire about you, Eleanor," she said thoughtfully. "You had every right to remain hurt and bitter after how they treated you. Instead, you chose to leave the door open for something better to emerge." Her observation made me reflect on the choices that had led us here, not just my confrontation at Le Ciel, but the subsequent willingness to accept genuine efforts at reconciliation, without either naive forgiveness or permanent resentment. Lao, balanced path between these extremes had required discernment and patience. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Vanessa lingered behind while Robert helped Timothy load his gifts into the car. She seemed to want a private moment, and I sensed it was important. "Thank you," she said simply when we were alone. "Not just for accepting our baby name request, but for everything this past year, for being willing to see me as more than my worst behavior." "That's what family does," I replied. "We see each other's flaws clearly, but choose to focus on possibilities rather than limitations." "I've been thinking about that text I sent you," she admitted, referring to the message that had excluded me from their anniversary celebration. "About how different our lives might be if you had simply accepted it, rather than challenging it directly." "Life takes unexpected turns," I offered again, the phrase that had become my mantra. "Indeed it does," she agreed, resting her hand lightly on her still flat abdomen. "And I'm profoundly grateful for the particular unexpected turn that began with you walking into Le Ciel with those cruise documents." After everyone had departed and I was alone in my garden, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The painful exclusion that had prompted my confrontation at Le Ciel had become the catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond my relationship with Robert and Vanessa. It had created ripples that touched Timothy, Ellen, and now would influence a new generation in the form of the child Vanessa carried, a child who would be named for Charles, embodying the continuation of his legacy in ways none of us could have anticipated. The journal Robert had given me at Christmas lay on my bedside table, half filled now with reflections on our evolving family story. Tonight I would add another entry, about celebration that included rather than excluded, about the courage to confront creating the possibility for genuine connection, about the legacy of values that transcends individual lifetimes. 1 year ago, I had been deemed too unsophisticated to attend my son's anniversary celebration. Today, I had been the first person entrusted with news of new life and the honor of a family namesake. The journey between those 2 points had been neither linear nor simple, involving painful confrontations, difficult acknowledgments, tentative steps toward trust, and gradual building of more authentic relationships. As stars appeared in the evening sky above my garden, I felt Charles's presence more strongly than I had in many months. Not as grief or absence, but as continuing influence through the values he had embodied and the relationships he had nurtured. "You would love how this story has unfolded," I whispered to the night air. "How truth spoken with courage created the possibility for genuine healing." In my mind, I could almost hear his characteristic response. "The most valuable legacies aren't things, Ellie. They're the courage to live truthfully and the capacity to love generously, even when both are difficult." As I gathered the last few glasses from the garden table, I spotted something I hadn't noticed earlier, a small wrapped package tucked beside the potted hydrangeas. The card identified it as a final gift from Timothy, apparently meant to be discovered after everyone had left. Inside was the 4th piece for our family collection, a small, exquisitely crafted silver frame containing a photo taken this very afternoon. All of us gathered in the garden, faces alight with genuine connection. The frame was inscribed with a simple phrase that captured perfectly the journey we had traveled, from exclusion to belonging. I placed it carefully in the beautiful cabinet Timothy had made, alongside the other pieces that chronicled our family's transformation. Together, they told a story not of perfect people or flawless relationships, but of the courage to confront painful truths and the commitment to build something authentic in their aftermath. Ellen approached, offering me a cup of tea as we watched them. "It's something, isn't it?" she observed. "Seeing relationships transform like this." "It is indeed," I agreed. "I never expected to find myself here, with all of us together like this." "That's what I admire about you, Eleanor," she said thoughtfully. "You had every right to remain hurt and bitter after how they treated you. Instead, you chose to leave the door open for something better to emerge." Her observation made me reflect on the choices that had led us here. Not just my confrontation at Le Ciel, but the subsequent willingness to accept genuine efforts at reconciliation without either naive forgiveness or permanent resentment. The balanced path between these extremes had required discernment and patience. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Vanessa lingered behind while Robert helped Timothy load his gifts into the car. She seemed to want a private moment, and I sensed it was important. "Thank you," she said simply when we were alone. "Not just for accepting our baby name request, but for everything this past year, for being willing to see me as more than my worst behavior." "That's what family does," I replied. "We see each other's flaws clearly but choose to focus on possibilities rather than limitations." "I've been thinking about that text I sent you," she admitted, referring to the message that had excluded me from their anniversary celebration. "About how different our lives might be if you had simply accepted it rather than challenging it directly." "Life takes unexpected turns," I offered again, the phrase that had become my mantra. "Indeed it does," she agreed, resting her hand lightly on her still flat abdomen. "And I'm profoundly grateful for the particular unexpected turn that began with you walking into Le Ciel with those cruise documents." After everyone had departed and I was alone in my garden, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The painful exclusion that had prompted my confrontation at Le Ciel had become the catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond my relationship with Robert and Vanessa. It had created ripples that touched Timothy, Ellen, and now would influence a new generation in the form of the child Vanessa carried. A child who would be named for Charles, embodying the continuation of his legacy in ways none of us could have anticipated. The journal Robert had given me at Christmas lay on my bedside table, half filled now with reflections on our evolving family story. Tonight I would add another entry, about celebration that included rather than excluded, about the courage to confront creating the possibility for genuine connection, about the legacy of values that transcends individual lifetimes. 1 year ago, I had been deemed too unsophisticated to attend my son's anniversary celebration. Today, I had been the first person entrusted with news of new life and the honor of a family namesake. The journey between those 2 points had been neither linear nor simple, involving painful confrontations, difficult acknowledgments, tentative steps toward trust, and gradual building of more authentic relationships. As stars appeared in the evening sky above my garden, I felt Charles's presence more strongly than I had in many months. Not as grief or absence, but as continuing influence through the values he had embodied and the relationships he had nurtured. "You would love how this story has unfolded," I whispered to the night air. "How truth spoken with courage created the possibility for genuine healing." My son's wife had told me I couldn't attend their anniversary celebration because I wasn't sophisticated enough. I had revealed the surprise vacation Charles and I had planned for them. And from that difficult confrontation had emerged not just reconciliation, but genuine transformation, a family finding its way from performance to authenticity, from exclusion to belonging, from appearance to substance. Full circle indeed.